trickle in as they come. Nice to see so many of you here with us today. To start off, I want to say that today's webinar is going to be recorded and available for viewing after. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chelsea Ranger. In this context, I'm working with investor relations and business development for the Life Science Cluster. And this webinar today is one part of a funded project by former Beacon called Methodology for Coordinated Investor Relations in Health and Life Science. The project is led by the Life Science Cluster alongside core partners, Norwegian Smart Care Cluster, Norway Health Tech, Oslo Cancer Cluster, and Biotech North. So you guys will see that as a part of this project, we will develop and host a series of investor-related webinars throughout this year, approximately once a month. We will keep posting those on our website and on LinkedIn if you guys want to follow. You might have attended last month's webinar that was focused on how to best prepare for partnering and business development conferences. But if you have missed that and would like to see that part of the series, then Teresa, can you please link that video recording into the chat? Today's topic, we're going to be focusing on current international trends in health and life science investments, and we have a few guests here to help us tackle this. So before I introduce them, I'd just like to ask, guys, it's super cozy in here, so let's keep our videos on. Please also, however, keep your microphones off. During the webinar, you are free to put questions into the chat, and actually we ask that you do. We have a Q&A portion that will happen in the last quarter of this session. You can like those questions and upvote them, and the ones that are upvoted or the most relevant, then we're going to take in those last 15 minutes. So to start off, let me please introduce Lucy Ellis-Tate. She has been reporting on biotech and medtech industries for more than a decade. She is the executive editor of Invivo, which is a premier resource for the life science business strategy covering biotech, medtech, and diagnostics. And Invivo is owned by global intelligence leader Citeline. Today with Lucy, we also have two great speakers from the financial community. So Fredrik Lehmann is a venture partner at the life science at Industrifonden, and he's also an entrepreneur in residence at Sound Bioventures. Marco Coisma is a VC with Innovestor Life Science with a long experience in digital health, international health, and medtech. So thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And Lucy, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Chelsea. Glad to be joined by Marco and Fredrik as well. Just to get us started, I'm going to share my screen for you and just do a bit of scene setting with some data from Citeline. Hopefully you will see that now. So I'm just going to give a quick insights from the Citeline Invivo team on biotech investment trends, mainly looking at the US and Europe, and new company creation, where we use Series A as a bit of a proxy to look at new co-creation trends. And so getting us started, I'm going to make a bold statement that there is cash available to be deployed in the biotech sector. Competition is tough, the risks are higher, and it's a more unpredictable market than perhaps we've seen in the last few years. But fundraising for biopharma VC looks to have normalised to pre-2018 levels after the giddy heights that we saw in sort of 2021. And this is according to Invivo's analysis of pitch book data. So you can see on your screen at the moment a chart there showing closed fund capital raised over the last 10 years and associated fund count. The funds included in this analysis, I will just make the point, they were earmarked for potential allocation in biopharma assets. However, that does not guarantee that that's where they were placed in the end. But our analysis is based on the statements by the VC groups of where that funding would be deployed. The decline in fundraising activity from 2021 through to 23 is likely, at least in part, to the cooling off of hype around COVID and the technologies born from the pandemic. But there's also a more general decline in investor interest, inflation rose, interest rates began to increase, and that, as I'm sure you're all aware, makes the cost of capital higher. 2023 saw only 19 billion in closed funds, which is quite a steep come down from 41 billion that we saw in 2021 and 31 billion in 2022. But it has, as I said before, normalised to this kind of pre-pandemic state, so it's more in line with what we saw around the 2017 to 2019 era. Looking at median value, though, those that have continued to close on commitments to the industry have been doing well. And that median value for funds, 2023 demonstrates a return to large average fund values at around 90 million, which is only a shade under what we saw in 2021, which is around 95 million. This trend hints at the fact that while there might be a reduction in overall quantity of funds, there have perhaps maybe been an increase in the quality of individual funds. And that might be a bit open to interpretation as well there. We're in a more conservative and cautious market, but for the right assets, there is cash to be found. In each year between 2019 and 2021, over 25% of that combined total closed capital had been committed within the year. 28% was of the value of funds closed had been invested before the end of 22 from the 21 funds. But this took a downturn between 2022 and 23, where we only saw 11% of raised capital deployed. So this increased conservation in 2022, the second largest fundraising year that we'd seen in the decade, means that even though last year might have been relatively disappointing, the war chest of VC firms are bulging and awaiting sort of worthy opportunities. There was a lot of optimism that we saw come out of JP Morgan in January for the year ahead, and that prospect of sort of falling interest rates and an increase in acquisitions of small and medium-sized companies are key events that we kind of need to see now for improvement in the market, which will in turn make cash cheaper, return funds to investors that they can reinvest in new startups and growth stage firms as well. Taking a little look at Series A's is, like I said, a bit of a proxy for new company creation. In 2023, there were just over 300 unique investors backing startups in Series A rounds. And they ranged from traditional venture capitalists to pharma and biotech companies or their corporate venture capital arms, and even academic centres as well. You can see on the screen at the moment just a bit of a ranking of amongst those groups who were the most active. Looking at traditional VCs, Arch Venture Partners, and Orbimed tied as the most active with 9 investments each. You can see Eli Lilly's corporate VC arm as well, up there at the top, followed by Alexandra Venture Investments, Forbion, F Prime, Sofinova, and Polaris rounding out that top group. And then finally from me, just a quick look at the geographic split, which I know can be quite useful for people. So looking at that Series A group again, where we saw 98 Series A's in 2023, which is US and Europe predominantly, the US led with the most headquartered companies in that area, perhaps surprisingly followed by the UK, and then Denmark and China rounding out the top group there. But quite a steep step down from the number of companies we saw in the US. So hopefully that's just a quick data grab for a bit of food for thought for this conversation we're going to have with Friedrich and Marco. So to get us started, guys, how have you had to change your investment strategy in this kind of challenging financial climate that we're seeing over the last couple of years that hopefully is improving? And what are your expectations going ahead into 2024 and perhaps a bit further if you can? So hopefully, Frederick, you can take that one first.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of things to this data to be discussed as well that you just showed. First of all, there are so many different types of VC firms, and they are not all alike. So at Industrifonden, we have the blessing and the curse to be an evergreen fund. So we kind of always have money to invest. We invest from our balance sheet. So when we saw this macro trend of things kind of going a little bit tougher, we took the conscious decision to say that we stated 1 year ago or a little bit over that in 2023 will be our year that we spend our most money ever on investments. So last year we invested around 60 million euros. And I think our previous record before that was around 30 million. So we basically doubled our top year last year. So I agree with you, Lucille. There is no lack of money in the system.
Marco, your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, we're not an evergreen fund. We are a very average median fund of about 90 million euros, like Lucy, you said in the report. But I guess we were in a lucky situation that we were established only in 2022 as a pretty fresh fund. And if you compare with funds that have been raised, let's say 2019, they've done a lot of their early investments at a time where there's been a lot of hype in the market. Valuations have been up, and there's been a lot of movements in the market, and perhaps some or even a lot of these investments that have been made are now in some difficulties because of the change in the funding environment and the climate. But from our point of view, as I mentioned, we were pretty lucky to sort of start investing at a time when that cool down had already, let's say, largely happened. So in terms of our view, I don't think that a lot has changed in our investment strategy. And considering the kinds of companies that we back, both in life sciences and in biotech, as well as in and health tech, there's the fundamentals haven't really changed. We're still looking at exactly the same things. We're looking at the clinical unmet needs. We're looking at the clinical and scientific evidence. We're looking at the strengths of the team and so on. So I have to say, I don't feel that a lot has changed in our strategy.
And another thing, if you go back to your first slide and look at kind of the investments, for funds like Innovestor and most of the funds in the world, they are closed fund. They are roughly 10+2 funds, as they call them, which means that you have 2 to 3 years to make your first investments. You have maybe 5 years to curate your investment, and then you have 2 to 3 years to exit your investments. So all the investments that were done under the peak year of 2021, if that was the case, those money were in turn raised by the VC firms in 2018, 2019, when everything was on top. And of course, if you have a downturn in 2022, that reflects that in 2020, when we were in the midst of Corona, it was harder for the VC firms to raise their own money. And now we're going to back of the Corona. So from at least what I have heard is that the VC funds are quite good at raising money again. So it's there is always a delay in these kind of processes when you look at the data.
I think that's really interesting and a good point there to think about it as a longer term picture, which is sometimes why we try to look at this kind of 10-year view as well. So just moving away for a little bit from that kind of climate conversation and focusing a bit more on you two and your strategies, what due diligence measures do you take when you're evaluating sort of potential risk in an investment?
Is Marco, you want to go first on this?
I can go first. Having said that, I mean, if there are a lot of startups in the audience or other stakeholders who have been through funds, venture capitalist due diligence processes, you pretty much know what that's about. And I don't think that there's a lot of new that I could add. I mean, the due diligence that we do is very, it's very customary, I would say. We look at many different things. We look at across the sort of commercial due diligence items, the economic, the financial due diligence items. But then I think that we put our focus on a bit of different things depending on what kind of company do we look at. So if we look at a biotech company, then we place a lot of emphasis in the, for example, in the IP section. Right. So we do a very thorough IP DD to understand what is their patent position, how defensible are their patents, and what does that patent and IP environment look like. And then if we look more at tech-driven investments, then we maybe place more emphasis on the team. So we do a lot of team DD, we do a lot of market opportunity due diligence. We always talk with key opinion leaders in the area to understand how they think about the market, how they think about the clinical need, the market opportunity, and so on. And that's sort of common across the different investments that we do, but the emphasis might be in a bit of, let's say, different places depending on whether we look at a biotech investment or a tech investment.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Marco. I mean, a due diligence is a due diligence, but again, we have to look at this as a continuum. So from the first meeting we have with anyone, of course, we do a little bit of due diligence or at least some kind of sanity check before we go into the second round of discussions and the third round of discussions. And of course, we talk with fewer and fewer companies along. I mean, we also have a pipeline. So when we go into the actual investments, when we are really considering investments, I mean, we set up a team of maybe 2, 3, 4 people that basically works 3 or 4 months full time with just one investment. So the due diligence work that is done by all the VC firms are actually probably a much larger piece than you would think. And these key opinion talks are absolutely crucial. I agree with you, Marco. They are the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, like every fund, we have partners and we have employees who have their specific expertise, and obviously, I mean, we have a standing point to evaluate these opportunities, but none of us rarely are key opinion leaders or true, let's say, deep substance matter experts in any specific field. So I think we place a lot of emphasis in understanding how does the market view this opportunity, the unmet need, and I think that's also good to understand. And we do that from independent sources. I also want to mention that it's extremely beneficial to talk with key opinion leaders, scientific leaders, clinical experts who are affiliated with the company. And we learn a lot and we enjoy those conversations. Those are very important, but we always seek to, let's say, because we go into these discussions by having some form of a hypothesis of the situation. I mean, we have our own hypothesis, and the team has their own hypothesis of what the market will look like. How does their asset align with that market need? And we always seek to validate that with independent expertise.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And perhaps we sort of said at the start of this webinar, we're showing a bit of the investment trends, but also giving people a chance to hear from you guys and hear some perhaps tips and tricks and things that would be useful as takeaways. So thinking about what you're looking for versus what people need to show you, how can companies best prepare themselves for that telling of that story? How do they show that they understand their competition?
So I can go first on this one then. Yeah, so that's a really good question. The first I would say that when it comes to the competition, at least in my experience, this is where most of the people actually miss out on their investments. Last year, or when I started Industrifonden, in 1 year we made 4 investments. We met over 300 companies. So there is roughly 1 to 2% success rate for financing. And out of those that didn't get fundraising, probably half of them were deselected because of they didn't know their competition. And it's not, I mean, it's very easy to say that this is a huge indication and look, there is a big gap in the market. These are the 5 commercial products and we fill a gap that's needed. But I mean, if we were looking at a preclinical project, the current clinical situation and reality is not really relevant. It's because it's going to be 6 to 8 to 10 years before the next thing is out on the market. So what we really like to see is that the companies that we are investing in or looking at investing in really understand what is in the pipeline ahead of them. Because they might be best in the world, but there is still going to be things in the pipeline ahead of them. And if you want to take some kind of masterclass, there is you should look up Jacob Lindberg at Oncopeptides from like 2014, 15, 16 on his investments talk, because he's absolutely brilliant in predicting already then what will happen 8 years in advance. And mind you, he doesn't say a single bad word about any of the competition. He just places them nicely and calmly where they should be used, in what kind of patient population, and then show at the end where is his molecule fitting in all these scenarios. And he raised $450 million to that company, before even making a single dollar. So that's a good lesson if you have time and interest.
So I think a few of us will be looking that up. Marco, your thoughts?
Absolutely. No, I wholeheartedly agree with what Fredrik said in terms of understanding the competitive environment. And because I've made the same observation, I think that one of the pitfalls that we often see when we discuss with the teams, and these are questions that actually come often, these come up during the very first talks that we have, the very first intros, when startups pitch their company and their idea to us. It is quite often that we see that there might be no mention of the competitive environment at all. And I have to say that I really don't like that. And it's not, I don't know whether it's just that, that you haven't sort of had the time to really dig into that competition or actually to do that work to understand that environment, or whether that's that maybe sort of there's a fear that if we point out that there's a lot of competition, this opportunity might not seem as attractive towards investors as it otherwise might be. And I have to say that I think that that's a false assumption, because what we seek to understand is that there always is competition. I think that's clear. If there's absolutely no competition in a given area, then then it's likely a bad business case, to be honest, right? In good business cases, there typically is always competition already in that area, whether it's marketing, whether it's in development or so on. So what we like to understand is that what are the, from the company's point of view, what are the critical factors that really differentiate your asset or your technology from what the competition has to offer? And it has nothing to do with talking down or bad mouthing the competition. Nobody likes that, and that's not necessary. Absolutely, because typically every competing company has their own merits. But what we like to understand is that with your asset and with your technology, what are the 1, 2, or 3 key unique features or items that are relevant to the market, that are meaningful for the market in terms of beating that competition, and how do you address them better than your competition? And this is absolutely crucial, because if we go forward in the investment process, that's work that we're anyhow going to do. Again, relying on the materials that the company has provided us, but we always do that independently as well. We try to map out and understand the competitive environment, having those talks with the key opinion leaders, where we're sort of constantly mapping out what the world around that company looks like. And it's absolutely crucial to understand those key unique selling points, those unique features that set you apart from that competition. And I think the company is in the best possible situation that at the end of the day, when we do these due diligence items, when we do these mappings, these key opinion leader calls, if at the end of the day, those validate those assumptions that actually these points are super meaningful to the customers, to the markets, and this company really addresses those points well, then that company is actually really well off in that process.
And sorry if I jump in here, Lucy,
I
think another assumption or false assumptions that companies are doing is that they try to de-risk things in absurdum. And we wouldn't be investing in biotech if we were not at least a little bit prone to taking risks. If we were to do a completely non-risk investment, we would be investing in real estate or forest or something like that. So there is a reason we are here. We, at least from our perspective, we don't mind risk. We like risk. We are happy to take huge risks, but we would like to know in advance what risks we are taking. And as long as we know that this is a hypothesis of X, Y, and Z, as Marco says, these things has to be true for this to succeed. As long as we know them and can, see what, maybe this is a phase 1 or phase 2 thing before we can address it if it really works, and that's fine. But don't shy away from risks, because that is kind of what we are investing in.
Definitely, and hopefully we're seeing a bit more risk appetite back as well. Marco, you're going to add something?
Absolutely. No, I guess I like that point. And one additional point that I wanted to make in terms of that competitive mapping is also, what at least we like is that if you can point out where a specific competitor has really succeeded or what have they done well, that's always great to understand, because in terms of making a new investment and thinking about the company strategy, it's always good to understand what are the points where you can look at the peers or incumbents in the market and say that this is what we're also aiming for while doing these other things better. So it's not only about being able to show why you are undoubtedly better than anyone already in the market than your competition, but it's about understanding where the strengths of these different players are and how do you position yourself in that competition.
Definitely. Just before I go on to the next question, just a reminder, guys, that you can leave your questions in the chat and we will leave time for Q&A towards the end as well. Let's talk valuations. How do you get to an agreement on a valuation, especially when you perhaps don't see eye to eye at the start of those conversations?
Well, maybe I'll start and Fredrik can continue. So I think we've seen we've seen a shift, a mindset shift over the past maybe 18 months. I mean, early 22 when we started off, that was still sort of, we were still living this sort of hot period. We saw a cool down on the market, but still, I guess many entrepreneurs, many companies raising money still had that mindset that carried over from the more, I would say, crazy years of 2020 and 2021. And now I think that we've seen that it's sort of rationalized a bit, so that the expectations have come a bit closer to reality. But I mean, obviously, the company's intent and motivation is to maximize the company value, so to argue as high as a valuation as possible, and that's fine. That's your job, and exactly as it should be. Then from the investor's point is to maximize the value of our investment, and obviously with a lot sort of, as the lower the valuation where we come in, the better we are off in maximizing the value of our investment. So we come from two opposite sides, and that's a normal part of the investment process. There are cases where we where we immediately see eye to eye that there's an expectation on the valuation, and we say that, okay, I mean, this sounds extremely logical. Let's do a bit more groundwork. Let's do the DD and see if the assumptions check out, and then everything's good to go. Then in many cases, the situation is that the expectation of the valuation of the company is simply, I mean, it's not even in the ballpark of what we initially think, right? And that, to be honest, that might kill the conversation. So it's not rare that we say that, I mean, we appreciate the view on the valuation, but we sort of disagree with that. We have another view on that, and if it's extremely far apart, then we just might say that we wish you good luck with your fundraising, and we hope that you're able to execute your plan. And it's not in many cases, especially now that the funding environment has been tough, fundraising takes much more time than maybe it took 2 or 3 years ago. We've then seen that companies come back after some months in saying that they've gotten a similar message in terms of valuation, maybe from other sources. And I think this is important because, I mean, whenever you talk with one specific investor, they have their own view. It's actually super valuable for you to discuss with a range of different investors and hear out what they have to say about many things, but also in terms of the valuation. And sometimes it just might happen that the investor feedback, when it comes to the valuation, is actually sort of quite systematic. And then it's maybe good that you return to the drawing table and say that, okay, maybe our assumptions were in line with what the market is prepared to pay for this kind of a company at this stage, and then recommence conversations maybe with a more realistic valuation. But having said that, it's always a discussion, but it's also good to understand that if there is a huge gap in terms of what you expect in terms of the valuation and what the investor's initial thought or expectation on what the valuation should be, it's likely going to be a very difficult discussion. And sometimes that requires a bit of time to mature, get investor feedback from others as well, and then perhaps return to the table if the feedback has been consistent.
I'm sure Frederick will have things to add there. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Of course, I agree with everything, and then I had maybe some few add-ons. And what is not uncommon is that we see companies coming to us who has raised a little bit of money, a few $100,000 or maybe $1 million from high net worth individuals or people around them. And in that case, of course, those people, I mean, all the glory up to them, because they are doing a terrific job pushing things forward. But they are very insensitive to valuation, and in fact, they can very often be triggered by a high valuation, even though they get a smaller stake of the company, because they think, wow, if these entrepreneurs says that this is the valuation and we're getting into it, that's fine. So we often those people that come to us with very high valuation are often, not always, kind of has been funded by other ways before coming to us. And then, as Marco said, then they might hit a wall because we see everything in the market. So we kind of know what is a preclinical XYZ company, what is it worth, because it's a marketplace. The valuation negotiation is not primarily between the company and the investor, it's between the company and all the other companies. Because if we don't think that we can get enough, as Marco say, we need to optimize our investment as well. And if we see that for X amount of money, we only get half the ownership of a company compared to another, all other things equal, then it becomes more of a discussion between companies rather than between a company and investor. So I think here's very important as well to separate the different types of investors that are there. I think EIC, if you manage to get them on board, they are not even allowed to set the valuation. So they need someone else to come in and set the valuation for them. So there are so many different types of entities doing investment. And I think it's very important when you do these things that you really understand who are you talking to and where are they coming from.
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, Freddie, go ahead.
Please, Marco.
No, yeah, I do want to touch on that. I think that at the end of the day, I mean, we should think about valuation in terms that, a company's valuation is exactly the figure that the market is willing to pay for, that it's not necessarily the figure that you're thinking, and it's not necessarily the figure that we're thinking. And coming back to Frederick's point, I think the tough funding environment has actually led to a situation, and this is not a sort of not a Nordic phenomenon, this is a global phenomenon, but a lot of earlier stage companies have had to do a lot of internal rounds, meaning that they haven't been able to attract, or they haven't wanted to attract external new investors to the cap table, to the company, but they've done rounds with their existing investors. And now typically with existing investors, what you don't want to do is that you don't want to do a down round. You typically don't have a motivation to do a down round with internal investors. You might do a flat round, you might do some valuation uptick, but nonetheless, now a lot of companies have done these internal rounds, these bridge rounds, what we call unlabeled rounds, because they don't have a seed or Series A label attached to those, with existing investors. And I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic. It's going to be interesting to see how that dynamics plays out over the next, roughly 12 to 18 months, because now these companies that have done these internal rounds are in a situation that they're again running out of cash. And now the question is, has the market changed? Will we do another internal round? Are our current backers actually up for that? Or are they now going for an external round? And to be honest, I don't see a huge improvement, at least so far, in the fundraising market. So it might be exactly the same situation that the company was in 12 months back. And that might be a hit to the existing owners, as Frederick pointed out. And that might be a tricky conversation to manage as a founder.
And the other thing that comes to that as well, when you talk about valuation and things, is that people are sometimes afraid of giving up control. They think that's something bad. And I would think that if you don't want to give up control, then you should stick to soft funding, because then you have the control. If you're asking people like Marco and myself to put in 5-10 million euros now and another 10 or 20 million euros later, we are going to demand the control. That's just how it is. And if that's not your kind of lobster, then you shouldn't go for VC funding at all to start with. The other thing, the other part of it is, of course, that even as arrogant investors as we are, super capitalistic, wants to make money, we also would like to align interest, because it's not in our interest that our founders are super grumpy. And this is to Marco's point as well. If we say that something is worth 10 and the founder says it's worth 100, we don't even take a second discussion, because we are so far apart. This will never be a good relationship in the end. So what we try to work with instead is look at warrants, look at options, stuff like that, to make sure that all the key people in the company are incentivized financially as well in the long run. So if we manage in the end to sell the company or to exit the company, you should get all the money that you need, right? But you might not only get it from your shares, you might get it from options and warrants and other things as well. So there is a way to balance this between the investors needing to have control and the founders actually gaining some financial benefit of this in the end. So but just think about it, that there are different financial instruments rather than actual ownership in order to make this profitable for everyone in the end.
And still continuing, I like what Frederick said, continuing on that. I think this is a bit different depending on whether we look at a drug development case or a tech case. But I have to say, in tech cases, we, as well as I guess hopefully any other investor in the field, we actually also pay a lot of attention to making sure that the founders will have a meaningful stake after the investment. So continuing on what Fredrik said, and sort of coming back to what I said, that we come from the other end of the spectrum, that we need to maximize the value of our investment. One of the ways to maximize the value of our investment is to make sure that the founders and all the key employees are financially incentivized to work towards the same goals as we do. And one part of that is to make sure that they, even after the funding rounds, have still a relevant ownership. So I just wanted to make that clear. It's not absolutely maximizing the stake that we'll get. It is maximizing the value. And maximizing the value incorporates making sure that the people who are actually are motivated and incentivized to create value.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Marco, for clarifying this. I was obviously unclear. I'm not saying that investors are going to take the entire company. It's just that the element of control in the boardroom still needs to be with investors, and that might be 51% or something, but it has to be. The control needs to be with the money side.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just taking us back slightly to what people need to bring to the conversation. We talked about understanding your competitive environment, but Marco, I think we've discussed this a little bit as well, but that go-to-market strategy that you need to see early on that's sometimes missing from companies. Can you talk a bit more about what you need to see there?
Absolutely. And my own background is in health tech and in digital health. My own background is not in biotech, and I have colleagues who have their background in biotech. And sometimes I've said that I really sort of envy their work, because when they look at a biotech case, there's pretty much only one go-to-market model, right? Which is to out-license that asset at some point to a pharmaceutical company. So I was sort of jokingly say that your job is easy because you have only one go-to-market model. And obviously it's not. But when we consider digital health cases, when we consider health tech cases, this actually is one of the top items that we look that we value and that we want to see when we look at investments. Of course, the team plays a big role, the product plays a big role, the IP plays some role. But if we look at where, let's say specifically digital health companies have failed over the past years, is not that they wouldn't have great technology. They often have absolutely stunning technology. Some of them even have great evidence, supportive scientific and clinical evidence. But what they really lacked is a scalable go-to-market model, and that incorporates identifying who is the relevant stakeholder that actually stands to typically gain financially from your solution. How do you engage that target group? Whether you target healthcare payers, employers, consumers as your paying customer. And this is something that we're extremely keen to understand, because unfortunately, especially within digital health, there's been a lot of failures in go-to-market over the past years, and it's been really difficult to try to nail down a scalable, profitable business model. And if you as a startup, if you can sort of educate us on where do you believe that you're going to succeed where others have failed, and how do you see that the product that you've developed and the evidence that you have generated and are generating, how do you marry that with a relevant go-to-market model, and how does that make sense? That actually plays a big role. We really like to see that.
Fredrik, any thoughts there on go-to-market?
No, I think Marco covered it quite nicely when he said there is only one go-to-market strategy for the biotechs, because it is, and that kind of sums it up, I would say.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump to the Q&A because we have a lot of questions and we have a lot of people on the call, so I'd like to give you a chance to answer some of their questions. So the first one then, how do you deal with the differentiated expectation in valuation between US and EU when there are investors being targeted in both regions?
Well, it's kind of easy, right? Because we are on the lower side, so it's not a problem for us if to have US investors, because they think this is cheap.
Marco, any thoughts?
Yeah, Well, I guess it depends. I mean, I guess it depends if you're already an owner in the company, and then the company goes for the next funding round and gets a great US investor who sets a high valuation. I mean, obviously that's great. I guess it's going to be more tricky if we have a Nordic company that has a strong US investor who's maybe taking the lead, has issued a term sheet, and I think then it has its pros and cons, and obviously we know that Nordic companies really, it's not easy to get a strong US investor on board. So if you're able to do that, I guess that's already a good sign. And typically you have a lot more access to the market, a lot of more availability of capital when you're able to engage with US investors. That's great. And then on the other hand, as was pointed out, then you typically might end up in a higher valuation that maybe you would be willing to pay. And then I would say we need to weigh both aspects. If it's sort of completely out of question from our point of view, then we're going to say that we will pass on that opportunity despite having a strong US investor. If it's closer to what we thought that if we were to lead that round that we would have put on the table, then we might say that, okay, maybe the benefits of having this strong US investor actually outweigh that increase in valuation, and we're still willing to go forward.
And I think it's also, you're absolutely right. And I think it's also a matter of, if you start with European investors, it's easier to add US investors. But we have seen a few cases on companies where they come to us and they have raised the seed and maybe Series A in US, and then they come to us, and that discussion is very, very short, because we see directly that we can't be part of this. Again, the case could be the best in the world, but since they are already taken that big step ahead, we can't follow with our money or with our investment focus. So it's easier to do it one way, starting in Europe and then adding US, than the other way around. If you start, and to Marco's point, the US has much more money, and they are much more, even more risk takers than we are. So if you manage to get the big US investor, take it. But then you must have it in your head that you might need to do all your fundraising in US moving forward. Because once you take one or two investment rounds in US, it's hard then to go back to Europe and add more investors for this exact purpose. So it's nothing wrong. It's actually quite good if you manage to do it. But just be aware that once you start that road, you're going to be continuing that road.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The next question is just coming back a bit to due diligence. And you mentioned about the team being an important part of that as well. How much of the makeup of a team is evaluated during that process? And can you give an example of when you might find yourself sort of tuned in or tuned out to a particular team?
Yeah, so the team is absolutely crucial. I used to work for Pharmacia, and then we said that I rather have a good team with a bad project than a good project with a bad team, because then we're going to fail. So the team is absolutely crucial. I would say that when I find myself tuned out is when the teams are too similar to each other. I don't particularly, this is just my very personal acquired taste. If you come to us with a team of 5 or 10 consultants, everyone being 75-year-old plus, they might all have the best experience in the world, but as a team, it might not be that exciting for us. On the other hand, if you come to us with a team with only, freshly graduated people, 10 of them, we might, for the same reason, say that maybe this is not the optimum setup. So there is a lot of talk about diversity these days, and I couldn't agree more. And one of the big diversities that I think should have in a team is actually age. You would really need to have a good span of various age components as well, as part of your diversity of the team.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Marco.
It's a great point. I think that sort of the team due diligence part starts from the very first discussion that we'll have. It's not something that happens, on day X and then it's done, but it continues throughout the investment process. And it is also, sometimes, and to be honest, when we look at cases, sometimes the reason why we say no to a specific case is just that there's sort of something maybe in the founder, something in the team that we just don't vibe with, or we just don't like. this might be a difficult piece of feedback to give back to the team. That I'm sorry that we're going to pass on this opportunity because we don't like you, right? And typically we want to be a bit more specific in that. And sometimes, honestly, it is difficult. So sometimes it is these more, let's say, softer values, whether we, vibe with the team, whether we align with the team. But it's good to note that that starts from the very first contact that you're going to make. Then on the other hand, we're seeing exceptional teams, exceptional founders. We absolutely like them. They're able to educate us across many topics. They're able to address questions. They're able to make us learn more. We absolutely love those cases. Still, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to make that investment, because you have all of these other topics, down the line that you need to check. You need to check the IP, product science, anything and everything around that. But I think especially from the, and reflecting on my own experience from the digital health point of view, that's the number one thing that we look at. And within our team, we did a ranking that what are the most important topics when we consider a digital health investment. Team was number one. Clear, crystal clear.
I think that's a really good point, that taking the feedback is as critical as future conversations as well.
Yeah. And for continuing on that path, many of the people that comes to us are first-time founders or first-time CEOs. And most of us that works in VCs, we have either been operational before. I've been doing 20 plus years before I start in operational before I started in VC, or people have spent a lot of time within the VC community, and they have seen a lot of things over the years. So hopefully, just by statistics or osmosis, we should learn something about company development and what, how to grow companies and how to develop them in a proper way. So one of the things that is kind of hard to quantify but still very important for us is we have a lot of discussion about coachability. Will this team be able to coach them in a proper way, or are they dead set on their way forward, and that's it's either their way or no way? That's also something that it's obviously very impossible to know in advance, but at least it's something we kind of discuss a lot, the concept of coachability.
Absolutely. And I guess the final point that I wanted to point out is that when we talk about doing that team DD and needing to like that team, I just want to make it clear that you should do that as well. It's a two-way street. If you don't feel that the specific investor that you're talking with is really aligned with how you think, or if you feel that it might be difficult to work with them down the line, and if you have these concerns, then that likely isn't the right investor for you, even though there would be money available. So think about that as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Marco. It's really, you don't want this, like when you have a company coming to you and you give them some feedback, and then 3 months later they come back and have changed everything according to what you told them. Because I think, to your point, Marco, then it's just better that they go and find another investors that are more in line with their vision and what they want to do, because there are enough investors in the world. And most often we try to the best also to guide people, because when people come to us with something and we feel like, well, this is maybe not really our, what we want to do, but it's an antimicrobial product. Why don't you go to Saventure? Because we know that they are only focusing on antimicrobials. So that might be a better fit for you. So we can also sometimes, when we know that this is a better fit for another investment fund, I'm more than happy to, pass people along to say that this is probably a better fit for you than myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it's that kind of two-way street conversation as well.
Yeah.
The next question, just coming back, so obviously we talked quite a bit about ownership stakes and what your expectations should be. But this question is, in your opinion, what's the ideal stake for founders at the seed stage?
I'm going to let you take this one, Marco.
Ideally, yeah. I mean, so I guess, what I recommend is that you Google this, and from Google, you'll actually have these nice graphs where it's basically laid out that how much founders should own after seed stage, after seed investment, how much should they own after Series A investment. Now, what I do have to point out that this is extreme. This differs a lot depending on whether you're talking about a tech investment or a biotech investment, right? Biotech investments are more asset driven. Tech investments are sort of more sort of team driven in a way. So I guess the answer is that after a seed investment in a tech case, the founders should definitely still own much more than half of the company after seed stage. That would be the short answer.
So can I take a question from the chat that I thought was really relevant? So it's from Magnus here, who asks, teams from startups will be science heavy, at least initially, and we need to expand with more competence going forward. Do you ever take a role recruiting such competence to a team, or do you entirely leave that to the founders? And I think this goes back to the coachable and the two-way streak of things that, in a way, when we are in discussion before an investment, we know that the investors will be as evil as they ever will be, and the company will be as nice as they ever will be. Once we have made an investment, then we are in the same boat, right? And then the investors are actually trying to be as nice as they ever going to be. And then we're going to see if the companies really are as nice as they were during the process moving forward. But one of the things that we like to say is that we can contribute with things, and I know for Innovestor as well that we take active parts in boards, and that is really an active part in the board work, and we try to help with all our networks, and our networks are quite extensive. So whenever there are, as you say, key recruitments, we do whatever we can to look in our networks first to see, do I know someone who could be a good fit for this? Or if they have a specific scientific issue or something like that, then you just call Milla and ask her what she would do, because she knows everything. So we try to help, along the way with everything that we can do. So if the founders, if they want to do this themselves, that's fine. But I have actually seen, I'm not sure if I like it, but I have actually seen in some cases in term sheets where it's explicitly stated that the board should approve all C-suite recruitments for that purpose.
Marco, any thoughts there as well?
And just to answer the same question, I think, we do both. We do also this, what we call create activities, company creation activities, where typically the companies where we invest in are university spin-out with scientific co-founders. And I think our standpoint is that if there is a strong CEO candidate within that scientific co-founder pool, that's fantastic. That's a great situation, but that's not necessary. We don't shy away from saying that okay, so this is a great case with a lot of scientific credibility, and this company just needs now a strong CEO with some other capabilities or expertise than perhaps the scientific co-founders. And I think we've done, I guess, 2 or 3 of these create companies where we've actually helped to bring in an external CEO in those cases. And I think everyone are better off in that situation.
Yeah, great point. I'd just add, so we won't get a chance to go through all of these questions today, but hopefully Fredrik and Marco, if we can share some of those with you afterwards, you'll be able to provide short responses if possible. In the last few minutes then, it'd be really good to just do a bit of a summary each. If we start with you, Fredrik, what is it that makes that win-win relationship? Can you summarize that in sort of a minute or less?
No, I don't think I can summarize it even if I get to my entire life. No, it all depends. It all depends. And just because it's not a good fit for a specific type of, investor founder pair doesn't mean that there is necessarily anything bad with either the investor nor the founder, but it just has to be a match. And we are long term. I know investor is long term. We know that we're gonna be around each other for many, many years, and in good times and in bad times. So it's super, super important that that there is a good connection here to start from, and that's just how it is.
Marco, what about for you? What makes a win-win relationship?
if I'd condense that to one word, I would say that would be trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
That starts from the very first conversation. I think one of the proxies for trust is to have a mutual understanding that what we're discussing about is not completely unrealistic. And we really appreciate also that the founders are realistic with their expectations, not only in terms of valuation we discussed already, that's one point, but when it comes, for example, to the market opportunity, the market size, how and when are they going to get there, and sort of these plans. So we like that things are realistic. As a venture capitalist, we need to be able to see that there is this outsized opportunity with this specific company. Otherwise, that wouldn't be a venture capital case. Then you would have other sources of funding. But we need to see that opportunity, but we also like if there's a mutual shared understanding of reality on how to get there. What are the possible cross along the way? And exactly as I think Fredrik said it very nicely. I mean, when we invest in a company, then we are in that relationship for a long term, and as long as that relationship is built on trust in terms of in open communications, especially when things go bad. Okay, I want to point that out. Especially when things go bad, that is really valuable, because that is also the point where we can together really try to solve those problems. If you don't bring forth those problems or challenges or drawbacks, then you're sort of more left alone with those things. And at the end of the day, that doesn't create trust. So I would just summarize it like that.
Great. Well, thank you both for a brilliant conversation, really useful. And thanks, guys, on the call for your questions as well. I'll just hand back to Chelsea for any final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you all both. This was absolutely fabulous. I see that we had a very active chat, so I am hoping that we can cherry pick a couple of these questions to bring to you afterwards. If you guys have additional questions that you'd like to bring to us as part of this project team, you can find us each on our respective cluster websites and reach out to us. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.